Alright, this is part 2 for our rocket. I'm going to try to unwrap this entire rocket and set up the UV Atlas all in this one lecture. So I'm going to have to work pretty fast to make that happen. So let's jump right in. First thing I'm going to do is finish this fin. So I'm going to select all, hide everything else, and zoom in and start unwrapping this. So the technique I'm going to use is the marking seams. So I can tell you right away, because this has such an irregular shape when you look at its side view, that we're probably going to mark seams here for sure. And probably this middle edge here. The reason why I say that is because of this kind of beveled edge right here is kind of messing things up. So I imagine we're probably going to have to mark that seam so that this lays out flat. When you look at it like this, you can still see the orange lines. This is going to fold over. Might be a little bit of stretching in there, but this will be much better than the alternative. The alternative would be to mark this as a seam, and then you have this problem with this beveled tip here. So my theory is that this will be one nice flat face right here, and then it'll fold over, and this will be a nice column of flat faces. It'll fold over this way, and you'll have this shape kind of laid out nice and flat. And then over here, same thing. Now, there won't be any bottom because we've split that bottom edge down the middle. So what I need to do is kind of open up this shape right here by marking a couple of more seams, probably here and here, just to make this like a flap that kind of extends from the edge here. So let's look at it this way. You see it's kind of like a flap that opens up this way, and then another flap that opens up that way. I imagine that that's going to split open like a little V shape. And that's probably enough right there. So let's go ahead and mark those seams and jump over to our UV editing window. Let's go ahead and select all and unwrap. Yeah, this is basically what I was looking for. Let's turn the stretch on, and you can see that it looks like there is no stretching on this, so it's kind of good. I want to see this with a UV grid, so let's go ahead and create one. And turn texture on so we can see the checkerboard pattern. Actually looks spot on. It's exactly what I was hoping for. Now that that piece is done, we could duplicate this and make copies in the other 3 missing areas. To do that, let's go ahead and unhide everything and then reselect this part. So link select that and separate this selection just like that. Go back to object mode. Now we have the rocket, which is one object, and the fin, which is another. I think I'm going to do this out in the default window so I have a little bit more room to see. And basically, because this is already UV unwrapped, just duplicate that. Rotate it on the Z 90 degrees, and then select both of those fins. If you think about it, I just need to duplicate that and rotate it 180 degrees so we end up with 4 duplicate fins. So rotate it on the Z 180, enter, and now we have all 4 fins. Just to verify, they all have UV unwraps. The fins are done. Let's move on to the rocket ship. So I'm going to select the rocket, select all. Notice that the rocket is the actively selected object. That's going to come in handy because I'm going to Control J to join all this together. And now, because of the order that I did things, this new combined object is named rocket. So I don't have to type that out again. Let's go into edit mode and select just the rocket part with the link selection and hide everything else. I'd like to use the follow active quads on this, but to do that I need to fix a couple of things. First of all, I'm going to want to hide that circle on the bottom. So let's select that circle and just hide it. We're going to unwrap the circle separately. And then we're going to need to fix the top of this thing because it's a cone shape. And if you remember our cone lecture, we can't really use follow active quads on this. We need to actually convert all of this here to quads instead of triangles. So one thing I can do is just go into vertex selection mode, select the tip there, and snap the 3D cursor to that selected tip. Now I can delete that vertex and edge select here, extrude it, remember this, and snap that selection to the cursor offset so it's centered, and scale it to about 0.02, something very, very small. Zoom in on that and you can see I've already deleted the vertex and we're pretty much good to go on this thing. So now everything that you see here is quads. There's nothing but quads here. I'm going to select all, and one thing that I forgot to do was select an active face. So let's go back to our face selection and shift right click on one of these faces and then shift right click again to select that face as the active selected face. Now we're ready for the follow active quads. Let's jump back to our UV editing window and open up the UV mapping menu, follow active quads, and hit OK. Now if you remember in some of the early lectures what to do about this problem, when you have a follow active quads and you see this stepping, it's probably because you need to mark a seam. So what I'm going to do is go to the front face. The reason why I'm going with the front face, if I unhide everything, there's two parts of geometry that are covering up the front face. One is this glass and the other is this fin. So the front edge here is actually ideal to mark as a seam because most of it is hidden by other parts of geometry. Okay, so let me go to link select that again and hide everything else. Now I'm going to also need to hide this face down here again. Don't forget that. Go to front view and edge select, not face select, edge select this edge right here. Mark it as a seam. Now I can select all. Make sure that you have your face selection. So shift right click on one of these to make an active quad. And let's try that again. Follow active quads. Okay. So now it lines up good. I want to see the UV grid on this. You can see that it's getting there. It's not quite there yet. Just need to balance off the checkerboarding pattern a little bit. So I'm going to use the island selection and scale this on the X just to balance that out a little bit more. Probably right about there. And I'm happy with that. So I'm going to unhide everything. We might as well tackle this piece right now while I'm thinking of it. So just select that face and just go to unwrap. It's a little big, so I'm going to scale it down in size. Maybe put the UV grid on so you can see it. You can see that it's actually still very big. I wouldn't worry too much about this right now because when we do the average island scales, it's going to fix all of that problem for us later anyway. The glass is pretty easy to do. I'm just going to link select that, hide everything else. There's a couple of ways we could go about doing this. One is we could just unwrap this whole thing and you could see this is the result of that. But if you wanted to treat the trim a little bit differently, then you'd need to separate the trim. So what I'm going to do is edge select this edge right here. This is a little bright. Let me put this back down to solid. So that edge, the last edge basically, and then control plus sign a couple of times until you have all of the trim selected. So that right there is good. And I'm going to separate this selection for now. So now the glass is done. We don't really need to do anything more than that to it. I think we're happy with this. So we're ready to actually move on. I'm going to unhide everything and go to object mode and select only the trim and hide everything but the trim. Let's go into edit mode and work on this piece now. Down here on the bottom, I'm going to edge select this loop and mark it as a seam. Select all and unwrap. Now this didn't produce a very favorable result. I could, if I wanted to, come in here and WA to straighten all of these out. So this is one way that you could do this. And then of course you'd want to go and straighten out all these edges, but there is actually an easier way to do this. Enter
Follow active quads.
So let's set that up. Let's go to face selection and make sure to select one of the faces and select all. Go to follow active quads and you'll see something weird happen. Something about the last unwrap, it kind of interferes with this. So what you need to do is reset and then try again. Just go follow active quads and you'll see that it actually did a pretty good job. Now it looks like there's some pretty severe stretching in there, but let's see what it looks like with the checkerboard pattern. I'm going to need to bring the islands down in size, so let's go ahead and pack that island into our UV space, and it looks like this. If I want to fix the size of the checkerboarding, I can scale this on the X. No, I think I want to scale it on the Y. Yeah, this way. So probably something like that. Since this is a very large object, I'm going to have to scale it down in size to fit inside of the UV grid. And I think this is probably going to be our longest object. So I'm going to scale it so it just fits inside of here with a little bit of margin around the edge. Let's go back to object mode and unhide everything else. And it looks like I forgot to associate the UV texture with the glass. We'll fix that in just a moment. I'm going to select the rocket and then select everything and join everything together. And of course, by doing that, the name of the object is going to be rocket because that was the selected object. Okay, so let's go into edit mode. And remember what I said, the glass is bright white because I forgot to associate the UV with it. So that will fix that. And all I really need to do is separate some of this stuff because it's all kind of piled in on each other. So I'm just going to grab everything and put some spacing between these objects. Not that one, but definitely the circle here. Something like that. At this point I can select all and we're going to average island scale. Now this is the largest object, so we're going to have to scale this down so that fits inside of our workspace. Something like that. Now we can fit this in here, so we're going to have to grab that. I'll put it off to the side like this. Maybe this circle I can throw down here. And all of these need to be selected together. Let's grab that and put it down in here. And then this piece. Not too bad. There's my finished UV atlas. Let's double check, make sure there's enough margin around everything. And if you're happy with this, then it's done. Let's take a look in default and wrap up this lecture. So that's how I went about unwrapping this object. Did you do basically the same thing? Maybe you arrived at the same thing, but you took a different path. Or maybe you were completely lost and you needed this lecture to help iron you out. But don't worry, we still have 4 more objects to get plenty of practice in before you start having to do this stuff on your own. So if you take the extra step and you put a nice texture on this model, feel free to share a screenshot of that texture in the discussions for this lecture, and I'll be sure to leave you some feedback, and perhaps some other students will as well. Coming up in the next lecture is the robot. So when you're ready to move on, I'll meet you in the next lecture.